President Santos, thank you very much for coming. Let me just give a brief introduction. I think most people probably know his background, but for those who don't, he's a native of Bogota, went to private school there, and then went to join the Navy, actually, and then went into a naval academy, the equivalent of our Naval Academy, and then served in the Navy for several additional years. And then he came to the United States to college at the University of Kansas, got his undergraduate degree there in business, and then went to the London School of Economics, where he got a master's degree while also working for the National Federation of Coffee, Colombian Coffee Exchange and in producers in London. Then came back to the United States and got a degree from the Kennedy School at Harvard. And then after that, went back to his native country and worked in his family's newspaper business, and ultimately became a journalist there and also deputy publisher. And then won a Nieman Fellowship to go back to Harvard, and then did that for another year, then went back to Colombia, and when he went back to Colombia, he got involved in government, and ultimately became the first trade minister of Colombia, subsequently became the finance minister of Colombia, subsequently became the defense minister of Colombia, and then in 2010 ran for president of the country and won, and then was reelected in 2014. And you're allowed to serve only 2 terms in Colombia, so you're finishing your last term. And he has 3 children. His wife was unable to be here this evening, but he is going tomorrow to give the commencement address at the University of Virginia, where his son is going to be graduating. So congratulations. So you met with President Trump today. So was he preoccupied with anything else, or did he focus on what you had to say?
He had no trouble. He was very calm, very focused, and I was surprised how open he was, how generous he was, very cordial. We managed to sort of make a good chemistry, and I know about his problems, and everybody knows about his problems, but he was very, very focused on the Colombian.
So how would you compare your meetings with him with your meetings with President Obama?
Well, it's like if you meet Claudia Schiffer or Naomi Campbell, for example.
Right.
It's very different.
Different styles? Different styles, okay. So let's talk about something that you have done that won you the Nobel Peace Prize. I should have mentioned that he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2016. So to set the stage, you became president in 2010, and you began a secret process to negotiate with the FARC. So how hard was it to keep it secret?
It was very hard, but it was a test for the FARC of how serious they were, because many presidents had tried the same. My predecessor and many of the other presidents had tried, and the FARC had never been really committed to a peace process. They wanted to use the negotiations to strengthen themselves and to gain political leverage. So this time I said, we will negotiate the agenda, which is 50% of any negotiation, completely secret. That took about 2 years, and they kept the secret, and that for me was very reassuring on their commitment this time to a peace process.
So was the secret negotiations, were they in Cuba, or was that in Colombia?
Some in Cuba, yeah, most of it in Cuba and some in Colombia.
Okay, so when it became public that you were in these negotiations, did it become very controversial in Colombia?
Yes, because I got elected president because I was a very effective minister of defense. And the FARC received the biggest blows militarily. We took down their number 1.
Well, under something you did, you led a bombing in Ecuador that killed the head of FARC.
One of the members of the secretariat is like their board of directors. But then to change the policy and sit down with them, many people didn't understand that. They wanted to continue to see if they could exterminate the FARC, which was impossible. Colombia is a country ideal for guerrilla warfare, full of mountains, jungles, and that would would have taken 20 or 30 years more. But what we needed was to weaken the FARC in order to sit them in a negotiating table, because in today's world, any asymmetrical war has to be terminated through negotiations.
So this war had gone on for 52 years.
Yep.
And so then during the negotiations, you ultimately reached an agreement with FARC, but then you decided to put it to a plebiscite, a popular vote, and it lost. Why did it lose?
Big mistake.
Big mistake.
Big
They voted
mistake.
wrong, or that you shouldn't have had a plebiscite?
Both.
Okay, okay, all right, okay.
I had to make peace is much more difficult than making war. Making war is relatively easy because leadership during war is very straightforward. The other guys are the enemies, rally the forces around you, and if you win, you become very popular. But making peace means you have to change the perceptions, the attitudes of people. People who have suffered have to forgive or at least reconciliate, and that takes a lot of effort.
Okay. So the agreement was turned down by less than 1%. So then you renegotiated the agreement.
Yep.
But after you renegotiated the agreement, you didn't go back for a plebiscite. You just went to your Congress. Why was that?
Well, first of all, I had our laws and our legal structure did not oblige me to go to a plebiscite. That was my own sort of obsession, and it was a mistake. And legally, I didn't have to go back to a plebiscite. It's Congress that approves these type of agreements. Right. That's in our Constitution, in our laws. So I decided to go through Congress. Okay. And it was approved by an overwhelming majority.
Now, you were the Minister of Defense under President Uribe, who was your predecessor, and he opposed the FARC agreement. So wasn't that awkward? Your predecessor, for whom you used to work, was opposed to it, and he led the opposition. So was that a little awkward? You didn't go to a lot of dinner parties with him, I assume, at that time.
Well, you know, the classics have written that the struggle for power is what brings the best and the worst of the human condition. That's politics. So that is politics. He also wanted to do what I did. He searched for a peace agreement with the FARC. He did not succeed. And so he's now opposed. Well, that's what politics is.
And he's still opposed.
He's still opposed.
So when you were told you got the Nobel Peace Prize, now normally they call people up in the morning, they wake them up or something. They can't wake up the president of a country so easily, so how did they tell you?
No, my son woke me up and I thought it was a joke. And it was 4 o'clock in the morning. I had the night before a long dinner. I was very much asleep, and I thought it was a joke, because I said, don't bother me right now, and I hung the phone. And then he went to my room and said, Dad, you won the Nobel Prize. I said, really? And then I realized I did.
Okay, well, that was a pretty big honor to go over there, but the problem was you won it after the vote had to turn it down, so wasn't that awkward?
No, it was a gift from God.
Because it made people realize they should...
Of course, and it was a great stimulus to continue and persevere in the search for peace.
Right. For people who don't really understand the intricacies of this agreement, which has many different parts, what is the essence of it?
It's the first agreement that has put the victims in the center of the solution. Their rights to the truth. Many times the victims, the only thing they demand is the truth. Why did you do this or that? The rights to reparations. We've been repairing more than 600,000 victims already. The rights to justice, transitional justice, right, and the right to non-repetition. This is the first agreement that puts the victims at the center of the solution. This has made this agreement a very unique and very comprehensive. Okay. There are many of the analysts around the world that have studied different peace agreements in the last decade say this is the most comprehensive and most complete agreement signed so far.
So under the agreement, the FARC are supposed to turn their weapons in. They're going to be melted down for some monument, but have they actually turned their weapons in yet?
At this very moment, they're giving their weapons to the United Nations, at this moment.
But how do you actually know, like if they give a gun, how do you know they don't have an extra gun somewhere?
Well, there's also the risk. Okay. But if they have the extra gun, and we catch them, they will lose all the benefits of the transitional justice.
But do any of the people who are members of FARC, could they still, even if they give the guns in and everything, they still can go to jail? Is that correct or not?
Yes, if they don't say the truth, if they in any way don't comply with the rules of the transitional justice, then they will be judged under ordinary justice, and they can go to jail for long term.
So was it harder to negotiate with FARC or with your own government and people in the regular establishment of Colombia?
Depends on the timing.
Okay.
Sometimes it's difficult to, it's very difficult to articulate a group in a situation so complex as terminating a war of half a century. There are many aspects that you have to take into account. So many times the big problem was sort of coordinating the group, the country, rallying public opinion behind the peace agreement, and of course negotiating with an enemy that you've had for so long, trying to build confidence. And this is, it's been a very difficult, but I think worthwhile.
But how many, your country is a country of roughly 49 million people, something like that. So how many members were there of FARC? How big an organization was it?
Armed people, they have 7,000, around 7,000. They are right now concentrated in specific areas. And they have a similar number of militias, a bit smaller, but militias around the country.
Okay, so today, when your term is up as president, somebody is going to obviously run and be the next president. And if a person runs who is against the FARC agreement that you have, could the agreement be undone in effect?
No, this is irreversible because, first of all, nobody in his right mind will give back the weapons to the FARC for them to go back to the jungle and continue the war.
Okay.
On the other hand, we have established in our Constitution some transitional articles that guarantees the compliance with the agreement, not at a legal level, but at a constitutional level.
All right, well, let's assume the agreement stays in effect and so forth, but aren't there still a lot of people who are not members of FARC who are producing drugs and they're being imported in the United States? How are you going to deal with all the drug production?
That's law and order. You have to be effective in from the law and order perspective. If you want to ask me why has the coca production increased in Colombia, I would say I thought that the agreement was going to last, the negotiations were going to last 3, maximum 4 years. They lasted 6 years. And the first item that I imposed on the FARC that we had to agree on is narcotics, the drug trafficking, because they were the problem and they have to be part of the solution. And people started to see that this is a major part of the agreement, and they say, oh, they're going to buy us out, the coca peasants. Right. And so they said, they're going to buy us out, let's increase the production, so we're bought with more production. Wow. And that's what caused that. But now we have in place a very unique, and for the first time, a policy to substitute permanently the coca plantations, because before, with the help of the U.S., we went to the coca plantations, either spraying or physically, at a very high cost. Right. We couldn't stay there because we did not control the territory. And the day after, they simply replanted. And so you were like in a static bicycle, pedaling and pedaling, right, and you didn't progress. Right now, because of the peace agreement, we have this unique opportunity to reduce the production of drugs out of Colombia and become not the first, hopefully a very minor exporter of cocaine to world markets.
But today, the production is still as high as it was a year or so ago, or maybe even increasing. So, okay, so it's going to take a long time before the production goes down, I assume.
No, not a long time. For example, I have my Minister of Defense here. He's very keen. We're monitoring week by week. So far this year, we have eradicated 15,000 hectares, which was the number of hectares we eradicated in the whole of last year. And I have my Minister of the Post-Conflict who has already negotiated with 80,000 families the substitution of drugs. So I think that in a year's time, we'll have 100,000 hectares less of coca plantations.
Okay. So for people who care about the price of cocaine in the United States, this is going to increase the price of cocaine,
I
right?
hope it does.
Okay, all right. So anybody might care about that.
I hope it does.
Okay. So, by the way, your Minister of Defense, he's not going to run for president, and in the opposite party's positions. I mean, you ran against your mentor, and might he run against you or run against your positions?
I ran, he supported me, and when I named my ministers, then he didn't like them very much, and so he started sort of opposing my.
When you were growing up, the biggest export from Colombia was coffee, I assume.
Yes.
And is that still the biggest export?
No. Right now, our biggest export is oil. Coffee used to be 50, 60%. Now it's less than 10%. But it's still very important in the rural areas. Still the most important agricultural product. And we still produce the best coffee in the world.
Best coffee. So Juan Valdez is still doing this, right? Okay. Okay. So let's talk about this. You're growing up in Bogota. You're a member of the Navy. And then why did you decide to go to a place that's landlocked? Kansas is not a place where you can do a lot of naval stuff. So why did you go to University of Kansas? There's no ships there.
As you mentioned, my family was in a newspaper business. My father was a very good friend of the then publisher of the Miami Herald. His name was George Beebe. And he went to stay at my house, and one of my older brothers wanted to study journalism here in the U.S. And he asked George Beebe, where should I go study? And he said, listen, you can go to Ivy League University, but if you want to get to know the real America, go to one of the best schools of journalism, which is located at the University of Kansas. It's in the middle of nowhere, but you will really appreciate what the American environment is. If you don't like it, you can transfer. He went there, he fell in love with the campus, with the university. It's a great university, great basketball team.
Right.
And he said to me when I graduated, listen, come here. You'll love this university. And that was true. I went there, and I loved that university.
So after the first winter, you still loved it? After you're used to Bogota,
it has its compensations.
Right. So you graduated. Then you went to the London School of Economics.
Yep.
So why did you just go over there?
Because the LSE was sort of the mecca of the economist. And I always wanted to study in London. I wanted to study at the LSE. I finally got accepted, so I went and studied there.
Okay. So you then went to the Kennedy School. Did your parents say, well, this kid likes a lot of degrees, you're going to different schools? Your parents didn't say you're going to too many schools, or they didn't say that?
No, they liked that I like to study. And at the Kennedy School, well, they liked not only that I wanted to study, but that I was a Fulbright Fellow, so they didn't have to pay for the tuition.
Oh, okay. So after you got your degree, you then went back to your family newspaper? Is that right?
I went back to
and your family still owns the paper, or?
No, we sold it about 6 years ago. I think at the best time possible.
At the top of the market.
Yes, I think it was a good sell.
Right. So then you're at your newspaper. Then you get a Nieman Fellowship to go back to Harvard, and you spent a year there. But then when you came back, why did you decide to go into government and not go back to the newspaper?
That's a good question. When somebody I respect very much, when I was offered to go to public life, become a minister, and that in my family meant that I would never be the publisher. I was deputy publisher, but if you go to public life, you don't come back. That's family rules. So I went to this person, I said, what do you recommend? And they said, listen, I know you very well. You as a publisher will have a lot of influence. And that's what publishers, and especially our newspaper, which is the biggest newspaper in Colombia, it used to be our newspaper, it's still the biggest newspaper in Colombia. And there's a difference between influence and power. Power is when you sign a decree and said, you name somebody or you establish policy. And I think you'll be happier with power than with influence.
Okay.
And that made a difference.
So they created a ministry for foreign trade, I guess, is that right? And you became the first minister?
Right.
And did you have a background in that area?
Well, I studied economics, and it was a combination of many things because we were a very closed economy. And to open economy, you needed not only to know about trade, but also a bit about politics, because you need to convince very many people, all the industrial complex, that they are going to be exposed to competition, that nobody likes competition. And so it was a very interesting transition. But it was necessary for my government, and Colombia today is a different country, among other things, because of that.
Okay, so you then became Minister of Finance.
Yes.
And then Minister of Defense. Did you had a background in defense because you'd been in the Navy?
Yes.
So which of those three jobs was the best of those three?
Well, the Ministry of Finance was a very tough job because I was named Minister of Finance in the worst recession we have had in the last 100 years. So I had to take very tough decisions, very unpopular. They used to burn my picture in every plaza in Colombia. My kids were small. I said, "Dad, why are they burning you in every plaza?" And I said, "No, don't worry, kids. The smoke goes up into heaven. This is God is with us." And
Did they
it was very difficult.
believe that? Okay.
It was very difficult. But in politics, well, what I learned there is it's very important to do the correct thing, no matter if it's unpopular.
Okay.
And that's why I made the peace process. It was the correct thing, even though it was unpopular.
But all right, so you had not run for office, and usually people who run for office, not always, or we have some history in our country of somebody running for office who's never run for office before, but you had never run for office before. No. So was it? What did your family say when you said, "I'm going to run for president"?
Well, if my father had been alive, he would have said no. My brothers had no say, so I decided myself. Okay.
All right, so let's talk about your country for a moment. Your country, maybe not well known to many people, but the biodiversity of that country is extraordinary. So I think you have more species of birds than any other country in the entire world. How does that happen?
Gift from God.
Okay.
It's
you have more.
Colombia is a very unique country, a very beautiful country, and it has, for example, we have more water, more rivers than U.S. without Alaska, more rivers than India. We have jungles that are so dense that they carry the highest biodiversity, or the biggest biodiversity you can find in the whole world. We have very different climates. We have one of the regions in Colombia is the region where it rains the most in the whole world. So that creates a very special biodiversity, and we have not only the biggest variety of birds, but the biggest variety of butterflies or frogs.
You have more butterfly species than any other country in the world.
Sorry?
You have more butterfly species.
We're on the top. Some people say there's more in Colombia than any other country. Some say more in Brazil than in Colombia, but we're in the top.
So in these jungles and the forest, you have people from like the Stone Ages that are still living there. You don't know whether they're really...
We have some very remote indigenous people, yes, and we protect them. And this is part of our culture, and it's part of our richness. We think that diversity is a strength, not a weakness.
Okay. So why is your country named after a man who actually never visited the country? How did you get the name Colombia? Because Columbus never got that close there, did he?
Well, but he got close enough.
Close enough? Okay, all right, okay. Okay. So talk about the country that's next to yours, Venezuela. How is Venezuela surviving?
How is Venezuela surviving? That's a very good question. It's a very difficult situation, and for us, for Colombia, it's very worrisome because we're the country that has more to win or to lose with whatever happens in Venezuela. We have a border of 2,200 kilometers, live border. We have more than 3 million Colombians that are living in Venezuela.
Have you considered a wall between those two?
No,
No?
there's no. We don't build walls.
No, you don't build walls.
We don't
Okay.
build walls. And we are very interested in a peaceful, hopefully democratic transition, and we're pushing for that. Because if there's violence in Venezuela, everybody will lose. We're trying to avoid violence, and we're trying to stimulate a democratic, peaceful transition. Very difficult with a regime that wants to hang on to power, no matter what. But we're pushing, we're trying to rally other countries, the U.S. and many other countries, to see if we can facilitate that transition.
Is the U.S. helping Venezuela by buying a lot of the oil for cash?
Well, it's the only country, I think, who's paying cash for the oil.
I see.
And leave it there.
Okay, so today, if I wanted to invest in Colombia and make an investment, what would be the best area to invest in? If I'm a businessman, I wanted to invest in Colombia, what would be the good things for me to buy?
Well, we are making a revolution in our infrastructure, and you can invest part of your portfolio in infrastructure. Tourism. If there is a potential in Colombia, it's tourism. And in every country that has any tourism potential, that has an armed conflict, what has grown the most after the conflict ends is tourism, and we have a tremendous variety of tourist attractions. Something that is getting very popular, many of the U.S. companies are investing there, health services. We have a tremendous opportunity in the agribusiness. I say that in a way, because of the conflict, half of the country was not exploited. With the peace process, you now have half of the country to do what you did in the West in the 19th century, conquer, or not only conquer, but develop, and there's a tremendous opportunity there in agribusiness.
So how many more months do you have as president now?
14 and a half.
14, not counting, but 14 and a half. Okay. So what would you like to accomplish in the remaining 14 and a half months?
Well, first of all, finish consolidating the peace process. This is absolutely essential. But that's not only what I'm working at. I have chosen education as the #1 priority in my government. The budget for education for the first time in our history for the last 4 years has been the biggest part of our national budget. We want to be the best educated country in Latin America by the year 2025, and we are trying to, we are reaching that. Poverty, we have brought down poverty more than any other country in Latin America in the last 5-6 years. 5.2 million Colombians have been lifted out of poverty, and we are doing a huge investment in technology. We connected every municipality in Colombia with fiber optics and broadband to use technology as a driver in our economy.
So if I wanted to go visit a place in Latin America, if I go to some places, I can go see the Galapagos, is a place that Ecuador has, and then you can go to other great, the Amazon in Brazil, forest. What's the biggest tourist attraction that you have? What would make somebody want to go to Colombia right now?
We have this tremendous privilege of, what do you want, and we have it.
Okay.
You want to go to the Amazon jungle? We have a beautiful Amazon jungle. You want beaches? You have beautiful beaches. You want, for example, the coffee region. I'll take you one day there and go to a coffee farm. You sleep there. You pick your own coffee. You roast it there. You come back and you invite your friends to coffee that you picked and you roasted. Okay. That's a great experience. Right. There are many things in Colombia to do for tourism.
So when you finish your term as president, you're still relatively young, for being former president.
Thank you very much.
So what would, now, in your country, is there a tradition of, in some countries like Mexico, very often the president leaves the country for a while, not always. In your country, is a tradition the president lives there and goes into business or doesn't go into business? What's more normal in their country?
Some have gone into business, but I don't think it's correct. I think that former presidents should not go into business. I want to be a teacher. That's what I want to be. I want to go and teach at the school.
Okay. In Colombia or the United States? or
Maybe Colombia and the United States.
Okay. And now that you have a Nobel Peace Prize, that gives you entree to lots of places. So are you going to work on various other peace endeavors?
Probably yes. Probably yes. I think the experience we've had in Colombia is a unique experience that it would be a pity not to share it with other countries and other conflicts. And I think what we learned with the Colombian experience is something that it's important for the world to take into account and take advantage of, and it would be very selfish from our part not to share it with the rest of the world.
Okay, so what would you like most Americans to know about Colombia? If you could just summarize in a couple sentences what you would like most Americans to know about your country.
Well, that we are the most important strategic ally that the U.S. has in Latin America, that we have been together for many, many years. We fought together in the Korean War. We are working together to help Central America fight the organized crime. We did together what I think the most successful bipartisan foreign policy initiative that the U.S. has launched in the recent past. Colombia was on the verge of being a failed state in the beginning of the century, only 16, 17 years ago. Today, it's a flourishing country, one of the top performers of Latin America. That is thanks to Plan Colombia in big part. So we are good partners. We share the same values, the same principles. I'm going tomorrow to, as you mentioned, to speak at the commencement of my son at the university that was founded by Thomas Jefferson, who had a tremendous influence in our founding fathers. So we have many things that we can work together. And what I told President Trump today, your strategic interests of the U.S. are much more in Latin America, south of Rio Grande, than many parts of the world that you are so interested in. And I believe that. And if you look south, and if you take into account more what Latin America represents, we're not the backyard, we're the front yard of the U.S., we will be much better off.
Okay. So for those who might not be going tomorrow to hear your address, can you give us a hint? What are you going to say about Thomas Jefferson and your address, or anything you're going to say tomorrow?
I'm going to talk to them about the importance of failure, how important it is to fail and learn about failing in order to be successful.
Okay, and if any of your children came to you and said, I want to run for office, what would you tell them?
I would say, don't be so crazy.
Okay. Mr. President, you've done a terrific job for Colombia. I want to thank you very much for coming this evening and giving us the insights. Thank you.